social studies teacher for the internet. Yeah. All right, everybody, another episode. Here we go. What do we got today? Well, I found something on Facebook in my timeline that made me go, And it's an article from the Washington Post, and it is called What It's Like to Be a College Professor Who Supports Donald Trump. Whoa, okay. So I got a few choice quotes to share with you. What does this guy have to say? Well, he starts by talking about other Trump supporters who are professors that he's talked to, and he shares this story. Just last week, a professor from another institution shared a Facebook post hoping for all Trump supporters to be destroyed, quote, immediately and forever. Who wants to be subject to such expressions of hostility? Other professors used to ask me questions about politics. Quote, you're smart, you're knowledgeable, how can you support whichever Republican was running for president that year? Far from being dismissive, that was used to lead to interesting and revealing conversations. Okay. Political conversations with students are rare too. I try my best to keep politics out of the classroom. Once a student said to me, you're conservative, aren't you? I responded that I was disappointed that he could tell because I tried to present views on all sides fairly, keeping my own views in the background. He answered, I know. That's how I could tell. Okay. So why, given the response it gets me from colleagues and friends, do I support Trump? Ask yourself, are you better off than you were a decade ago? Okay. Well, obviously I'm reading this as somebody who's a liberal, who considers myself to be a progressive. My first thoughts of this are like, hey man, how can you have a PhD in philosophy and support Trump? Hard for me to fathom. But okay, I'm withholding judgment. He did put forth some ideas in here about how he approaches teaching as somebody with political views, which is something that I'm really interested in because that's what I've done. And I totally understand where he's coming from, though from my personal perspective, when you start talking about politics, you actually need to let the students know what your bias is, because if you don't, you might inadvertently be putting your bias on the other students. That was my approach. You know, I can understand his approach as long as he's truly doing what he's saying he's doing, which I may have to disagree with, as you'll see. So let's continue here. I had this question of like, well, what is this class like? Is he being fair? Is he doing this the way I think is right? And I thought, okay, let's check out he has videos up online. His name is Daniel Bonevac. Daniel Bonevac. He is a professor in Austin, Texas, and he's a philosophy teacher. But he seems to be going a little bit down the history lane, which is, of course, one of my specialties. So let's just see what he has to say about progressivism. I got this from the middle of his lecture on progressivism, and let's hear what he has to say.
I call it the paradox of progressivism, but it's a problem that, in a way, anybody thinking about these issues has to confront. Why won't that centralization threaten liberty just as much as the centralization the progressive is trying to prevent? That is to say, the worry is that corporations are having too much power. But by centralizing power in government, you're in effect producing this great mega corporation that's even bigger. Why is that a good idea?
Mega corporation? This is the first time I've ever heard the phrase mega corporation used to describe the federal government. It's rather odd to me because I don't see how the federal government operates like a corporation. Businesses are not in competition with the federal government. The federal government does not produce goods in the same way that, like, he'll mention, I believe, Apple later here. The federal government is not producing iPhones, people. The federal government is not producing PCs. So, I mean, what does the federal government produce? The federal government produces, it has a military. It's not really a product. There's infrastructure. The government is involved in that. We're making roads. bridges, things like that. But where the federal government seems to do most of its work is in other places. So this idea of like the government being like a mega corporation is very strange to me. It seems to me like this is in my opinion, this is more of a political point of view about this conservatives' idea of what the progressivist movement was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's, that seems to me politically interesting. Let's continue listening to what he has to say.
Why will that not be corrupting in exactly the same ways that the corporate powers were corrupting? In fact, if anything, you might worry that it'll be worse. Government has more power. It has the power to coerce you. Private companies don't have that. I mean, Apple Computer, can it force you to do anything? You can choose not to buy its products. The government can force you to do things. They can't say, you are now convicted of murder. They say, I've had it with this. I'm out of here. Right? I no longer submit to your authority. You can't do it. And so government has a coercive power, it has greater power, it's also less accountable. You can actually stop buying the product of the corporation. You can't just easily stop living under the government, though of course you might emigrate. Now, in any case...
Okay, so what he's saying here is that several things. One is that he's saying that corporations have less power than the federal government does, and therefore... This idea of like the government is a mega corporation as opposed to corporations, it's because they can coerce you through the law, and he said corporations can't do that. Historically, I don't think that's true. Why do I not think that's true? Look at what things were like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You had company towns. What is a company town? A company town is where a company literally owns everything in the town. The land, the school, the grocery store, the shops, the stores where you buy the goods that you use to work with. Say if you're in a coal mining town, you would be buying the tools to coal mine with. And you're not buying things with actual money. They pay you in credit to use things in the town. This is literally what was happening in our country, and people could not get out of it. It was very bad. The labor conditions were bad. The progressivist movement, the idea in the late 1800s, early 1900s was like, these conditions are bad. It's not fair. Workers need more power, and we can't get it ourselves. If we're a worker, we need to do we need help from the government to make this fair. And so what does that look like? It looks like passing laws to protect people. It looks like having the government actually go and make sure that those laws are being followed through different enforcement tactics, whether if it's something related to banking, you have accountants and auditors looking at what's going on, and then following through if laws are being violated, with the government making sure that they're paying for the legal process to go through to hold these people accountable. It seems logical to me. It seems like nothing like a corporation, nothing like what I just mentioned about what the government's duties are. Seems like a corporation to me. So that's kind of strange, and in my point of view. Let's finish this out really quick.
That is a puzzle that I think anyone who thinks about progressivism has to confront and provide some kind of answer for.
Anybody that's a progressive needs to answer for. Okay, well, you're a conservative. Where is the alternating viewpoint in your class? If you say that progressives need to answer for that, where's the point of view supporting that? You're doing a whole class on progressivism and you have no positive ideas about supporting it? Wow, I mean, wow. Okay, so let's look back at this period of time, okay? 1908, the Democratic Party, the Progressive Party, the Progressivist movement seems to be rooted in this. I went back and I looked at their Democratic Party platform that was published on July 7th, 1908, and let's look at some of the lines from this document. Okay, so here we have the beginning, near the beginning. I'm going to jump around a little bit. This line: the conscience of the nation is now aroused to free the government from the grip of those who have made it a business asset of the favor-seeking corporations. It must become again a people's government and be administered in all its departments according to the Jeffersonian maxim: equal rights to all, special privileges to none. Shall the people rule is the overshadowing issue which manifests itself in all the questions now under discussion. So this looks a lot like the world we're living in now. Everyone is really concerned that corporations have too much power. We recently had the Supreme Court case, which myself and many others, including a lot, even like Trump supporters, have been concerned with, which is Citizens United, which is the ruling by the Supreme Court that spending money on political campaigns is an act of free speech, and therefore it shouldn't be limited because you shouldn't be able to limit free speech. The effect of that is that rich people are able to spend unlimited amount of money on our elections. Okay, so let's continue with the Democratic Party platform of 1908. We had a big problem with major corporations running things. We had the railroad barons, the steel barons, the oil barons, and another big corporations, the coal barons, really controlling people in a way that was bad. So what's in the party platform? Railroad regulation. They wanted to increase regulations on what the railroads had to do, so they couldn't overrun people that needed to use the railroads. Banking regulations. I swear, is this 2016 or 1908? We're constantly talking about needing more regulations for the banks because they wrecked the economy in 2008, which is interesting because in his Washington Post article, Bonevac specifically said, what was your life like 10 years ago? Well, 10 years ago, George W. Bush was president, and then he wrecked the economy because the banking regulations were removed, and so they were able to do all sorts of really fishy, weird, manipulative stuff that destroyed our economy, and we had to spend the beginning of Obama's term trying to fix that because George W. Bush, the laws that weren't in effect, caused $1 trillion deficit in that first year. Labor rules, think of all of the horrible things that were happening in labor, where there weren't limits on how many hours you had to work in a work week, pay, if you have disputes with your employer, what do you do? Well, there was very little you could do back then. The gains of the progressivist movement allowed for making unions to fighting back against corporations that were oppressing you. Say today you're in a company and you're a woman, okay? Your boss starts sexually harassing you, maybe sexually assaulting you, since this is the Trump election, right? What are your recourses? Back then, you had none. This is not mega corporation stuff. This is the rights of people stuff. Okay, let me just scroll down to the bottom of this document to the conclusion. This is the conclusion of the Democratic Party platform of 1908. The Democratic Party stands for democracy, and the Republican Party has drawn to itself all that is aristocratic and plutocratic. The Democratic Party is the champion of equal rights and opportunities for all. The Republican Party is the party of privilege and private monopoly. The Democratic Party listens to the voice of the whole people and gauges progress by the prosperity and advancement of the average man. The Republican Party is subservient to the comparatively few who are the beneficiaries of governmental favoritism. What does this sound like to you? This sounds like what we're at again today. Occupy Wall Street several years ago came up with this phrase, the 1%. The 1% of people that are benefiting from our system. This is what they're talking about here, the comparatively few who are beneficiaries of governmental favoritism. Governmental favoritism towards corporations is something we have now. There are many corporations like General Electric that haven't paid any federal tax at all. None, when they're making billions of dollars. Donald Trump hasn't paid federal tax when he's supposedly a billionaire, right? The oil companies like ExxonMobil have been actually not paying taxes and receiving federal money. That means people who pay federal tax have a portion of that money sent over to that corporation that is raking in record profits at the largest amount in the history of the world. And we're subsidizing that. American taxpayer money is going to help them. This is in the Democratic Party platform of 1908. This is part of the progressivist movement. And Professor Bonevac neglected to mention that in his lecture to his students in Austin. Let me finish up with a couple more things from the Washington Post article, which I found interesting. He says, in this article, arguing for Trump, progressives try to counter corporate economic power by centralizing political power in executive branch agencies. They try to cure centralization with more centralization. This sounds like exactly the argument he was making in class. So when I hear a conservative talking about money and corporations and making a very anti-progressive argument, my first thought is, well, does this guy have any other interests? Is he involved in? Is he a corporatist? I'm not going to label him a corporatist. What I am going to say is that he is involved in as a co-founder of a corporation called Brief Logic. It is registered as a foreign company in Texas with its registration in Delaware. And we know that Delaware is famous for companies registering there because it's a tax haven. You don't have to pay as much taxes if you register your company in Delaware. Their clients have spent over $10 billion on advertising last year. So he is a co-founder of a company that has spent that their clients have spent $10 billion on advertising in the last year. I don't know what to say to Professor Daniel Bonevac besides I'm not quite with what you're saying. I'm stating my opinions. Feel free to disagree with me. To students of his that may be watching this video, feel free to contact me if you would like to know more about progressivism that maybe you missed from your class. I'm glad to try to fill you in with more information if you're curious. I have taught this stuff before. Okay, everybody, take care, and until next time, enjoy. Remember, like, subscribe, contribute to the Patreon if you want. Catch you later.